I'm back from a week-long vacation. Did I miss anything? Besides the obvious earth-shattering news that happened at OpenAI this week, which was nothing short of Shakespearean, other things actually happened in the world of AI, believe it or not. One bit of news that came out of the saga was the revelation that OpenAI is looking to make their own hardware in the form of AI chips. However, one thing I think has been overlooked are the reasons why. Sure, people are pointing out that it would reduce their reliance on other companies such as Nvidia, but I think I found another reason that no one seems to be talking about. I'll have those clues for you on today's episode. Also, we saw a new tutorial from the master himself, Andrej Karpathy, was released last week. I take questions from viewers and talk about everyday uses of AI that could be beneficial to you. And a big shout out to the young lady who got me this adorable new little rubber duck. Thank you. We will explore all of this and more on today's The Great Indoors. Okay, well, that was an exciting week in the world of AI. Now, most of you at this point are probably familiar with what's gone on. So I'll give a brief recap, but then I'll point you to some resources where you can get much more in-depth about the story. They've done a fantastic job of breaking down everything that's happened, and I really recommend you go check out those resources. They'll be in the description below, but I'll talk about them in just a moment. But to quickly recap, there are a set of players on the stage that you must be familiar with. On the one side, you have Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, and Greg Brockman, chairman of the board and de facto lead engineer. In the middle, you have Mira Murati, who is the chief technical officer. And on the other side, you have the board of OpenAI, which includes Ilya Sutskever, who is also the chief scientist. Now, when all of this started, Ilya emailed Sam and told him to join the board and him on a Google Meet call, which is, by the way, hilarious given the 10 billion plus, 13 billion investment that Microsoft has made in the company at this point, but that's neither here nor there. On this call, Ilya supposedly unceremoniously fired Sam Altman from the position of CEO and booted him from the board. I mean, not him by himself, obviously. Some majority of the board had to agree to all this. And then, not long after that, Greg Brockman was contacted and told he was no longer chairman of the board, but was not being outright fired from the company. Well, that didn't matter because shortly after, he quit in protest. It was right around this time that OpenAI posted an announcement stating that all of this had gone down. And the reasons they gave for the firing was that Sam had not been consistently candid with the board, and they no longer trusted his leadership, which is rather vague. To cut right to the spoilers, we still don't really know exactly what the board saw that caused them to fire Sam. Now, there's been a lot of speculation since, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now, once the news broke that they had been fired and demoted, OpenAI itself jumped in with their support for Sam and Greg. This incredible show of support was enough to get Sam back into the doors of OpenAI, this time as a guest, to have a discussion with the board on coming back as the CEO. But in a shocking twist, the board went and hired Emmett Shear, formerly of Justin.tv and the former CEO of Twitch, to step in as CEO of the company. This supposedly came as a shock to Sam, who genuinely thought they would work things out. Came as a shock to the rest of us, Sam. So once this news had been announced to the world, the board started to feel quite a bit of pressure to be a little bit more forthcoming as to why they were suddenly doing all of this. Now remember, leading up to this point, there was zero indication that anything was amiss. Sam had been making regular public appearances I talked about some of them on the show last week, and everything seemed like it was normal. Now, one character I've not told about is Satya Nadella. He's the CEO of Microsoft, and of course, Microsoft has a huge stake in all of this. With a $13 billion investment on the line, it's in their interest to make sure this works out as well as possible for them. And in Satya's view, Sam was the right person for the job. So Satya stepped in and tried to work with the board and Sam to try to work out the best possible outcome. So of course, when Emmett Shear was announced to be the new CEO, he announced the start of a brand new AI company within Microsoft that Sam and Greg were going to head up. Well, this immediately caused a storm on Twitter, with all of the employees posting OpenAI is nothing without its people, which was essentially a message to Sam and Microsoft saying, I'm happy to follow Sam over to Microsoft. And in fact, a letter had been started that was signed by 95% of OpenAI, threatening to walk out of the company if the board wasn't forthcoming with their reasons why they ousted Sam in the first place and worked everything out. Essentially, Microsoft had just acquired OpenAI for nothing. But, not actually acquiring AI, just, their brain. Well, obviously, this caused the board to rejoin the discussion table, and this time the result was Sam would return as the CEO, though not necessarily to the board just yet, and a new board would be named with only one or two holdovers from the old board. One holdover is Adam D'Angelo. Ilya Sutskever was no longer part of this new board, but he did take to Twitter and state his regret for going along with the board in the first place, professing that he was just trying to do what was in the interest of the company. He seems to genuinely regret the role he took in Sam's ouster. They seem to have made up, and now everything appears to be back to normal. But this time with a new board that's probably going to be much more agreeable to the direction of making AI and the technology that they're developing profitable, for better or worse. Anyway, this has been an absolute wild saga. I'm sure I'm missing some details because this is all off the top of my head from what I remember from last week, but I would really encourage you to check out the channels I've talked about before, like AI Explained, who does an amazing breakdown over 3 or 4 videos of everything that happened. I'll link those in the details below. I'll also link some of the articles I thought were really informative, did a great job of breaking down what happened. Before he was fired from the company, Sam was in talks to try to put together a new venture to make chips for the company. If you've been following AI, you probably are familiar with how hard it is these days to get the compute power you need to both train and build these models as well as run them. NVIDIA is probably the biggest company right now creating the GPUs and TPUs required to build and run these models. Well, Sam Altman, if you'll recall, had done a big worldwide tour last year, and the original goal he cited for doing this was to listen to their customers, to listen to the people who were really using these tools, get their feedback, and incorporate that into their product. And while that was true, what we now know is that the other goal for him was to have a conversation with all of these other countries, in particular the Middle East, to talk about a brand new venture for building chips. Now, obviously, one of the biggest effects this would have, if you can pull it off, because it is not cheap or easy to put together your own chip fabrication company. Remember, these are some of the most complicated things mankind has ever made. Not only do you have to hire the talent to design the chips, but you have to acquire all of the resources it takes to actually make the chips. Some of those are precious metals and can be in short supply. So acquiring those reliably can be a tremendous challenge. But then you have to build up the infrastructure in order to build the chips at scale, such that you can then build the next generation of AI models. All of this is a tremendously difficult challenge, but if you can successfully do this, then you are no longer required to rely on other companies such as NVIDIA and TSC to build those chips for you, who are also building those chips for all of your competitors. So if you have your own source of chips, that puts you way ahead in the AI race. But I think there's another reason why you would want to build your own chips, and that has to do with the design of the chips. And the reason I think this is from a recent panel discussion between Geoffrey Hinton, Ilya Sutskever, Demis Hassabis, and Tommaso Poggio of MIT. And during the discussion, Geoffrey Hinton had this to say.
One other influence that
I think hasn't happened yet and needs to happen, and it hasn't happened for hardware reasons, is fast weights. So Ilya will be very familiar with the idea that you can actually implement fast weights, but it doesn't buy you much because you can't do your matrix multipliers anymore, because every case has different fast weights, so you can't share the weight matrix between different cases. I think maybe people will eventually start using fast weights when they have different hardware, where maybe weights are conductances. So that's something that's yet to come.
But I hadn't.
So what's Hinton talking about there? Well, he's talking about deep neural networks. People often talk about neural networks in terms of its size, and that size refers to the numbers of parameters. For frontier models like GPT-4, that number counts into the billions, and each one of those parameters is essentially a matrix of numbers. Each one of those parameters has a certain weight associated with it, and the parameter and its weight are what determine whether or not a parameter fires in a given situation, and works roughly the same way that the brain does. Each one of your neurons either experiences enough electrical energy to fire and carry the signal on to the next neuron that it's connected to, or it doesn't. And that activity determines how your thought process works. Well, it's the same thing with large language models. And so Hinton seems to be alluding to this notion that custom hardware would allow you to take advantage of techniques like fast weights. But the current hardware that's available does not allow you to take advantage of things like this. But custom hardware would. And it's interesting to me that he points to Ilya in particular, who again is the lead scientist at OpenAI and a protege of Hinton's, that he is familiar with this concept. And so I wonder if OpenAI is starting to experiment with the hardware design of the chips such that they can take full advantage of how that works. In other words, there's only so much you can do from a software perspective in terms of how the neurons in an artificial neural network behaves. The substrate that that software works on, and in this case that's silicon, is analogous to the substrate of what the software in our brains run on, which is neurons. So imagine going into your brain and changing the way your neuron works such that your thoughts happen faster. Well, that's kind of what I think Hinton is talking about here. If you can go into the silicon chip and change how they work, then you can leverage new techniques in your software to make that perform better. So all of this suggests to me that we're going to start seeing OpenAI experiment with new chip designs to improve future models if they can work out getting their new venture off the ground and building their own chips. Or at least that would make it much easier to do. Anyway, it's been an absolute wild ride of a week, and basically I'm never going to go on vacation again. But there is one more important thing Hinton said in this conversation, and I want to talk about that for a minute.
But I had an epiphany recently, this spring. I was sort of thinking about analog computation and how to make things more energy efficient. And I suddenly realized that maybe these digital intelligences we've got that use backprop, where you can make many copies of the same model that behave identically, Maybe they're actually better than what we've got. They're still a bit smaller than what we've got, but not that much smaller. They can pack a lot more knowledge into a lot fewer weights. And my current belief is they're probably just a better form of intelligence that couldn't evolve because it's so energy intensive. It needed us to create it. But my current belief is that, so this switches to the other question of the role AI for neuroscience, that new developments in AI may not be telling us much about neuroscience. It may be we've got most of the inspiration we could from the brain, and now the new developments don't necessarily tell us much about the brain. That's a radically new thought for me. For 50 years, I thought that if you made your AI a bit more like the brain, it will work a bit better. And I no longer really believe that.
That is profound to me. As someone who's been interested in the brain as well, and I've just recently concluded reading a book about the brain and how it organizes itself and essentially grows itself into production, and knowing that Hinton got into AI in the first place so that we could use that to better understand how the brain works. It's profound to me that he feels we've gone as far as we can go with at least the current paradigm of AI in learning how the human brain works. What we've created is something profoundly different from the human brain, an intelligence greater than the human brain. And we have perhaps reached the limit of how the human brain can inform that effort. The reason this is interesting to me is that, we've borrowed quite a bit from the brain, certainly, this notion of a neural network for capturing and retaining information and recalling that information with a natural language interface. But there's a level of complexity within the brain that can really only be teased out in an algorithmic fashion. And this requires a lot of time and energy and results in an amount of information far more than we can capture effectively. And so it's interesting to me that here we seem to part ways. Elsewhere in the AI world, believe it or not, other things did actually happen. Andrej Karpathy, also from OpenAI, released this tutorial, or what he calls the busy person's introduction to large language models. It's a pretty thorough walkthrough of what language models are, how to actually make one, and how they work. Interestingly enough, he uses the open source Llama 2 model as his primary example. Karpathy, of course, is a big supporter of the open source community and is a frequent contributor himself. The reason this is so great is that Andrej Karpathy is considered one of the premier teachers of machine learning. He has an extensive background with a pedigree that goes well beyond OpenAI. He led up AI research at Elon Musk's Tesla for quite a while, leading full self-driving development during his tenure there. Honestly, if you watch my show for any period of time, there's a certain stable of characters that you see come up again and again and again, and Karpathy is one of them. Someday I'll talk about people like Fei-Fei Li and Demis Hassabis, or generally somebody other than OpenAI, I promise. But for now, they seem to be by far the most frequent contributors to weekly news in artificial intelligence. But they aren't the only ones. But Karpathy goes really in depth in this video, covering things like fine-tuning, emerging properties, tool use, because language models are capable of using tools like internet browsing access, calculators, you name it. Multimodality and things like security aspects of them, jailbreaks, and other issues. And of course, his vision for the future of large language models, which is a new paradigm of operating system that he thinks will be the next generation of computation. As a computer scientist, it's pretty exciting to see all of the parallels between language models that we use today, how the memory works, both the short-term and long-term memory, and how that compares with more traditional computation systems. But you don't have to be a computer science nerd to appreciate this talk. One of the things that makes Andrej Karpathy's videos so great is just how accessible they are. So if you are at all interested in the inner workings of these models, I highly recommend checking this out.
Letters, we get letters, we get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right, and now I want to switch over to questions. And the question this week comes from J_Kaylee, who asked, how will AI replace people like wedding videographers? What do you think that will look like? Now, the context of this question came from a larger discussion about how AI will replace certain occupations. And people seem to think that there is a long list of occupations that AI will replace, whether that's in the near term or the long term. And certainly in the long term, I think that AI will replace quite a number of occupations. I don't think I'm alone there. But in the near term, I don't think that anyone is going to be replaced, or at least not too many people will be replaced in the near term. And by near term, I mean the next, year or two. Remember, we're in the world of AI now, and things move way faster than they did before. So short term is only going to be about a year or two at this point, because a year in AI is an eternity these days. But in the next year or two, I think for the most part, those of us who learn how to use AI tools effectively will essentially replace people who have not. And that's part of the reason why I started this channel, was so that I could communicate not only what these tools are capable of, but how fast that capability is changing and improving. Because remember, technology moves at an exponential rate, and it is hard for us to imagine just how quickly that increases. We're used to thinking in linear terms. So in the near term, I think people working with AI tools, especially in the world of photography and videography, are going to very quickly outpace those of us who aren't leveraging AI tools. And just as an example, if you've ever used Adobe's tools, before they started incorporating AI, they were already quite powerful. But when I edit these videos together and I use Premiere Pro, they have a new feature that allows me to transcribe everything that I've said and very quickly cut out all of the ums and and random pauses I make when my brain just turns off trying to think of the next thing to say. Yeah. Be glad you don't have to watch the unedited version of this. You'd be here for hours. But these tools are absolutely incredible. They're like magic. And they can make one videographer turn into several. I mean, literally two. You could just copy paste the same videographer everywhere in your picture. But the question here is, what does it look like when you become replaced by AI? And I think there's a couple of paths for how that might look. Already we know that the modern camera phone is incredibly powerful. It allows you to take photographs that match and in some cases could rival the more traditional camera produced by Sony or Canon. Now with cameras like the i15 Pro and Pro Max, these allow you to shoot in log, which is a professional quality color grading system that gives you the incredible dynamic range of really top tier cameras. And that, coupled with AI powered editing software, lets you do professional quality work for consumer grade prices. So now let's imagine that you have a wedding where most people are carrying these kind of phones around in their pockets. I can easily imagine asking everyone for those photos, feeding them into an AI and having it not only select automatically the best of all of them, but using those to fine-tune a model and start generating even better photos. But then going a little further down the road, when AI starts to become embodied, that is, you start having robots with AI in them, you can easily imagine a fleet of very low-profile bots moving about, well, any kind of event, not just a wedding, and having them snap photos and even communicate with guests to ask them to pose for a photo, or even wrangle the entire group together for one large group photo. Given the conversational nature of these systems, that's already within their capability. The hard part now is really the navigation and ensuring that they are not a distraction from the main event. But once you have these sort of telepresence robots capturing all of the footage of this event, then the process becomes even easier for them to gather up all of the footage, select the best of the bunch, and again, use them to fine-tune a model designed to create the absolute perfect set of photos every single time. Now, this works really well in controlled environments like weddings and so forth, but as the tech gets better, and pathfinding gets better, the embodied agents get better, you can use them in more and more types of events. Heck, you can imagine a fleet of drones at any sporting event, demolition derby, you name it, all snapping the ideal photos and videos, and us photographers and videographers a thing of the past. But hey, on the bright side, now we actually get to pay attention to what's going on rather than experiencing life through a viewfinder. Of course, you have to figure out that whole income thing, but yeah. Anyway, thanks to Jay Cayley for that question. If you guys have a question, please feel free to put them in the comments below or reach out to any of my social media, which will be in the description below. All right, the last thing I want to do today is talk about some practical uses of AI. Because like I mentioned earlier, those of us who learn how to effectively use AI will very quickly start to replace people who have not learned how to use it. Because in many cases, it turns one person into 10 people depending on what they do. And to demonstrate this, I thought today we would use Bard because, believe it or not, there are other AI systems out there. And Bard is fantastic. And in fact, it recently got a new update that allows it to understand and recognize YouTube videos. Hey, what do you know? I have one of those. So I thought we'd check it out. Well, it just so happens I have a lot of really great YouTube links that we can test this out on. So to start with, I think I'll try last week's episode, and I'm going to give it a link to this video and see if it understands it. Let's try it out. Can you please summarize this video? So you can see based on the YouTube logo and title that it's using its YouTube plugin to take a look at the video and give me a summary. And here we go. This video is about the latest advancements in artificial intelligence. Yep, checks out. The speaker, that's me, discusses Microsoft's Ignite conference where the company announced new hardware and software products. Yep. So this is pretty amazing. How does it do that? Well, it's actually a pretty easy process. What it appears to be doing is accessing the transcript of the video, which it then analyzes and is able to summarize just like it would any document that you would hand it or any huge blob of text. In the past, I would do things like this by using a tool to transcribe my videos, giving it that transcription and asking it to summarize. Well, that's essentially what it's doing under the hood. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more secret sauce that Google has put, and I think they're going to expand on this tool so that it does even more down the road, but right now I think this is where it's starting. And if anybody at Google is watching this and thinks that I am off a little bit, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you about how this works. But I wonder what else it knows about my channel. So let's try it out. What do you... Oh, wait, hold on. It would help if I was actually typing in. What do you know about the person in this video? Now, it's not like there isn't anything out there about me, but I wonder if it can connect the fact that I also have an IMDb page and I used to be in TV shows and movies. I don't know. So it's using the YouTube plugin again. That's interesting. The person in the video is a computer scientist and a YouTuber who is interested in artificial intelligence. Checks out so far. He is concerned about the potential dangers of AI. Well, that's true. But he also believes that it is important to understand and explore AI so that we can better prepare for what is to come. He is creating this channel to communicate about AI in a way that is easy to understand for people who are not experts in AI. Well, that's true, but also it kind of cheats because I talked about all of that in that video. Well, is that cheating? No, that's still pretty amazing. So there you go. It's a short but really effective use of AI. Next time you're faced with a really long video that you don't have time to watch, but you still want to know what happens, now you have a tool available to you to summarize those really giant videos. But not mine, right? You're going to watch mine all the way through, right? Right? You smash the like and subscribe button, right? You got to smash it. That's what the kids say. Is that what that means? All right, that's my show this week. Thank you very much for tuning in. And thank you again for this awesome little doc. I really appreciate it. Thanks all, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Ah, it is coffee time. Quite right. Quite right.